Discworld, Terry Pratchett's massive fantasy series spanning just over 40 novels. Discworld definitely improves with age, and I think that Color of Magic really exemplifies that, because compared to the later novels, even compared to the second novel, it's just not a very strong entry. But that doesn't mean that it's not a fun read, that there aren't plenty of laughs and joy to be had from reading it. So today I will be providing a quick summary of The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts as well as the thoughts that I collected from people on my Twitter and Instagram posts where we were discussing The Color of Magic. So first, let's go ahead and get into a synopsis of The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. This is a story that is kind of broken into 4 different short stories that are loosely tied together by a cast of main characters that include Twoflower, Rincewind, and of course, luggage. In the first story, Twoflower, an insurance salesman from the counterweight continent, arrives in Ankh-Morpork with his luggage. The luggage, of course, contains a massive quantity of gold that he doesn't really understand the full value of because money works differently in Ankh-Morpork. So he has a lot of money but doesn't really know it, and that makes him a great target for thieves and ne'er-do-wells.
How often do well? There.
Thankfully, Twoflower enlists the help of a guide to help him understand life in Ankh-Morpork, and that guide is Rincewind. Rincewind is a failed wizard, and he agrees to help Twoflower for a meager sum. And that meager sum is actually, again, just a lot of money, and Twoflower doesn't really understand it. Next, we move on to the second story, where we encounter the Temple of Bel-Shaharoth. Bel-Shaharoth, I think. That's right. Bel-Shamharoth. Bel-Shamharoth is sort of a Lovecraftian entity, and that's kind of how you should just be thinking of him in this part of the story. And in this story, we also encounter Hrun the Barbarian, and of course we meet his talking sword, Kryn, as well. They escape from the Temple of Bel-Shamharoth by destroying Bel-Shamharoth with the flash on Twoflower's camera. Yeah, again, this is a very silly series. That is how Bel-Shamharoth is destroyed, and they escape from the temple as it crumbles, and we move on to the third story. In this one, Rincewind, Twoflower, Hrun, luggage, and of course, Kryn, the talking sword, encounter dragon riders. Twoflower and Hrun are captured, leaving Kryn with Rincewind. Kryn convinces Rincewind to go and save his companions, and Rincewind does so as heroically as he possibly can. He is challenged to a duel by the Dragon Lord. Meanwhile, the princess of the Dragon Riders approaches Hrun the Barbarian with a proposal of marriage, which would make him the new Dragon Lord, provided that he kills all of her brothers. And Hrun, of course, agrees. This sounds like a pretty good deal. Twoflower summons a dragon with the power of his imagination, and he is the one who rescues everybody, even though Hrun the Barbarian didn't really need to be rescued. However, Twoflower unfortunately faints during their escape, and this causes his imagined dragon to disappear, which leaves everybody in freefall. Hrun the Barbarian is rescued by the princess of the Dragon Riders, leaving Twoflower, luggage, and Rincewind to plummet into the sea below. They use luggage as a makeshift flotation device, and they continue down the sea toward the edge of the world. This will bring us to the fourth and final story in The Color of Magic. In this one, Twoflower and Rincewind avoid falling over the edge of the disc by landing in the circumference, which is essentially a net around the disc that helps capture falling debris. They are pulled out of the situation by a sea troll who unfortunately has no real intentions of taking good care of them. He is going to bring them to his people in Kroll for a sacrifice. So it's less a rescue and more a postponement of their demise. However, they do manage to avoid this situation as well. However, the way that they do it is by going over the edge of the disc. Yet again, Rincewind is in freefall while Twoflower is in a spaceship that is designed to go over the edge and determine what the sex of Great Atuin is. And that is The Color of Magic. It is 4 separate, kind of disconnected stories that could follow the flow of a single novel, but it's broken down a little oddly, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in this video. So let's go ahead and get to my thoughts. Interestingly, I finished The Color of Magic while I was on vacation in Virginia, and I decided to just record my segment of the video there. So we're going to go back in time to when I recorded my thoughts on The Color of Magic, and then I will splice that in here. So take it away, past Taryn. The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. This is the first book in our Discworld Read-Along, where we're going to go chronologically through the entire Discworld series. This is a pretty easy one to knock out. It took me about 6 hours of reading at a pretty average pace in order to finish it. So the book focuses on Rincewind and Twoflower for the most part. You also get to meet all sorts of other interesting characters, the most interesting of which is Death. Death is my absolute favorite character across Discworld, although I am also truly partial to Samuel Vimes and Lord Veterinari, who we will meet later on as we continue our read through in Discworld. Now, he's not quite the version of Death we're going to get to know throughout the series, especially once we get to the books that are largely focused on Death, but you can start to see a glimmer of the personality that we're going to get to engage with in Death. I'm interrupted. Anyway, we begin to see a bit of the personality that we're going to get to experience with Death in this book. He just doesn't appear as often, and he's just not quite the Death that you're going to get to know and love. So if Death wasn't your favorite character in this book, don't worry, you're going to get to know a lot more about him, and you'll understand why I love him so much. Now here's why I personally don't particularly love The Color of Magic. I feel like it's not quite as cohesive as the other Discworld stories are going to be. It's a little rushed, and we are constantly bouncing from one location to another over and over again, and the story just doesn't have quite as much direction as the later stories are going to have. This is a good book by all means. I would never give it anything less than 4 stars. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's whimsical. It's just not my favorite Discworld novel, and I'm probably going to say that it's going to continue to be my least favorite of them, just because it's not quite as cohesive and enjoyable as some of the later stories. But I also understand people who really love this one and why they love it. You get a taste of what Discworld is, but you don't really get a taste of what the books are going to be like later on, because the books do definitely improve, in my opinion, as we continue on through the series. I should turn on a light, but I feel like I would be orange. Let's turn on a light. Am I too orange now? Probably. I don't know. It's sort of getting dark out because it's a little cloudy today. I'm going to hope that this works. Let's continue. One thing that I do enjoy about this book is okay, now it's bright again. One thing that I do really love about The Color of Magic is that the book ends with a semi-literal cliffhanger. We end with Rincewind having fallen off the edge of the disc through the waterfall, and he plummets, but he is snagged on a tree branch, so he briefly gets another glimpse of life. But then Death comes to him, and then Scrofula comes to him instead because Death had business elsewhere and was very busy. And so Scrofula is going to take Rincewind's life. Then Scrofula semi-admits that reincarnation might be a thing. So Rincewind drops off of the tree branch, falls down and into the great space. He sees the elephants, he sees the great Atuin, and that's where the book ends. And now it's time for the next segment of the read-along video, in which I'm going to be going through some of the things that people have said to me about The Color of Magic on my Instagram and Twitter posts. So let's go ahead and dive into some of those comments, and I'll give you my thoughts on them. All of those discussions are going to be taking place back at my house in Kansas City though. But before I get on out of here, I wanted to remind you can like, comment, and subscribe, all of which really help me out as I try to grow this channel and will help you to get notified when the next Discworld read-along video is coming out. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do any or all of those things, and let's go ahead and get back to Kansas City now. Thank you very much, Pastor Taryn, and let's go ahead and get to your thoughts on Discworld. If you don't know how the read-along works, there are 2 dates for every book. The first date is going to be the discussion date, which is when you should have the book finished so that you can participate in discussions on my Twitter and my Instagram accounts. The other date is going to be the date of the discussion video, which is today for The Color of Magic. So if you wanted the chance for your thoughts to be included in the video, you needed to participate in the discussion on Twitter or on Instagram last week. There's obviously going to be a chance to do this for every single one of the books, so if you missed the last one, don't worry, you're going to get your chance with book 2. So let's go ahead and get to what your thoughts were, and I'm going to begin with the polls that I had up. I had polls on my Instagram and Twitter accounts, and each of them asked the same questions. These are probably questions that I'm going to be asking for each of the books, just to give people a really easy way to participate without having to write out their thoughts every single time, because not everybody wants to do that and not everybody has the time to do that. So let's go ahead and get to the poll results. The very first question that I asked was, of course, whether or not you had actually read The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. Thankfully, 78% of people said that they had read it, and 9% of people said that they were still working on it. So hopefully those of you who are still working on it have been able to finish the book, so you can join us for book 2 here shortly. And if the week between then and now was still not enough time for you to finish the book, don't worry, I always take December off, so you're gonna have plenty of time to catch up before we get to the 3rd book in the series. The next question that I asked was for people to give a star rating to The Color of Magic. I was somewhat surprised by the response to this one because I kind of expected it to skew more on the 4-star side, but instead it skewed very heavily on the 3-star side, with 65% of people saying that they would give it 3 stars, and then 29% of people saying that they would give it 4 stars. I myself would give it a really low 4 stars, maybe something like 3.6 stars or something like that, just because this really isn't Terry Pratchett's strongest work, and I have some issues with the book, even though I do enjoy the read, and it's a pretty quick one to get through. Now, as you can see, there were some people who gave it 5 stars, which, wow, if you want to give Color of Magic 5 stars, I can't wait to see what you think about the later books, because it really only gets better from here. And with that, I went on to ask people what they enjoyed about the book. The options that I gave them were humor, characters, story, or something else. And if you said something else, you would just comment below the thread what it was that you enjoyed so much about the book. Now, interestingly, when I first tallied the results, characters were way in the lead, but I gave you 2 days to finish the polls on Twitter, and in those last few hours, humor wound up taking the lead by quite a significant margin. While yes, the characters are really funny in their own right, the really funny stuff tends to happen when Terry Pratchett is narrating or just giving his opinion on a particular situation in the story. 62% of people said that they really enjoy the humor, and 38% of people said that they enjoyed the characters. The characters being at 38% is a good segue into the next poll, because the next thing that I asked was which character was everyone's favorite. Now, I gave 3 primary options using our 3 characters who are present throughout it, and that is Twoflower, Rincewind, and of course, Luggage. And of course, you didn't have to pick these 3, there was always the option to vote for someone else, and a few people did that, and one person commented that their favorite character was Death, which strongly agree. Death is my favorite character in all of Discworld. I just don't really feel like he's shown as much as he could have in this book, because he's very much a background character in this story, and he hasn't quite grown into himself as we're going to see later on. Even in the Light Fantastic, you really begin to see a lot more of Death's personality. So if you loved Death in this book, get ready for a lot more Death. In fact, we have a Death book coming up in just a few months with more. I'm pretty excited to see what people think about that one. But with that option out of the way, I bet you can't guess who it was that actually won the poll. It was Luggage with 69%. Nice. As great as I think Rincewind is, and as funny as I think Twoflower is, the fact that Terry Pratchett made Luggage sentient and fun and weird and gave it a unique personality even though Luggage doesn't talk, I just really enjoyed it. Luggage comes in clutch throughout this story. I really enjoy the character. Luggage continues to be a unique and enjoyable character through to the Light Fantastic. So if you are one of these 69% of people who enjoyed Luggage as a character in this book, get ready for more Luggage in the next one, because he continues to shine. It continues to shine. Luggage continues to shine. I was a little surprised by the fact that Twoflower didn't secure any votes at all. Yeah, Twoflower is really annoying, but he's kind of annoying in a way that makes you want to pat his head and ruffle his hair and say, oh, you. Twoflower is an idiot, but he's a lovable idiot, and he's the very first tourist in Discworld, and I think he represents tourists pretty well as somebody who has been a tourist. Let's move on to my next question, which was what didn't you like about the book? And the answer was a resounding 71% for pacing. Absolutely. That for me is the biggest problem that The Color of Magic, which is upside down. That for me is the biggest problem that The Color of Magic suffers from. The pacing of this book is just off, and it's not helped by the fact that it's 4 different stories that are vaguely connected by these characters. And then further to its detriment, the stories kind of have the same setup where these characters get into a bad situation, and then they escape from it, and they get into another bad situation, and then they escape from it. Each of them has the same thing that you will typically see in a story, where it has a beginning, it has rising and falling action, and then it has its climax. So you have that over and over again, and it makes the pacing of this very short book feel pretty off. So I agree, for me, pacing is the weakest part of The Color of Magic. So 71% of people were right, because my opinions are objective. Let's go ahead and move on to the next poll questions. The first one is one that I was really excited about, because I asked people if this was their first Discworld novel, and 69% of people said yes. I honestly thought that number was going to be significantly lower, because I figured most of the people who would participate in the read-along would be people who already love Discworld and just wanted to read through it again with other people who love Discworld. Instead, 69% of the people who are participating said that they'd never read a Discworld novel before. That's awesome. Welcome to Discworld. I'm sorry that Color of Magic is the one that you had to start with. Again, I don't really recommend beginning in chronological order, but we're gonna get through it together. And I personally think that having a bunch of people around you who really love Discworld will help to push you forward through some of these earlier novels that just aren't quite as great as some of the later ones. But if you enjoyed The Color of Magic, you're gonna really love what's going to come next. Even the Light Fantastic is miles better than The Color of Magic is. So thank you very much for using this read-along as a reason to get into Discworld, and I'm excited to be on your first Discworld journey with you. And the next question that I asked was, are you going to be continuing with the series? 79% of people between Twitter and Instagram said yes, while the remaining percentage said they weren't sure. Nobody said no though, so that's a win. I know that for some people, Color of Magic may be a little bit discouraging of an entry into Discworld because it has several weak links, but I promise you, it only gets better from here. Even the Light Fantastic, like I said, is better than The Color of Magic. So if you're somebody who is on the fence, I strongly encourage you to go ahead and stick with Discworld, at least get through the first maybe 3 stories or so. They're all very easy reads. If you read Color of Magic, you know just how easy it is to read and how quickly you can get through it. You can knock out The Color of Magic in a weekend if you're only reading for a couple of hours each day. So stick with it. That's my recommendation. Let's go ahead and talk about some insights that I got from other people participating in the read-along. One of the responses that I got to a question regarding your favorite scene or your favorite quote was from Darren Sanders on Instagram, and he said, something about the imp inside the camera makes me laugh. I mean, that's gold. And yes, I definitely agree. Some of the imp scenes throughout Discworld really stand out to me even now and are highlights in my mind of the Discworld series, regardless of how long it's been since I read a particular book, because the imps are just hysterical all around. The fact that all of the technology in Discworld is basically operated by these little imps that live in the boxes is absolutely hysterical, especially considering the fact that when I was young, I figured there were manual operators for things like automatic doors, mainly because I was misled to believe that by my parents. And the imps essentially are that. That is what the imps are in Discworld, which is just fantastic. They all have their own little personalities. Sometimes the imps just don't feel like doing anything, or they decide to take a break, and if that isn't a great example of how it feels to work with a printer, I don't know what is. Another Instagram response that I got came from Neo, and Neo says that his favorite part was the climax of the final story in Kroll. Now, if I'm understanding this correctly, I believe that what he is referring to is essentially just the end of the book, but correct me if I'm wrong in that. From what I remember, the final story in Kroll is when they go over the edge of the disc, and honestly, I definitely agree that is a really strong ending for Color of Magic. It ended way more strongly than I expected it to, and even more strongly than I remembered it, because I kind of blur this one and the Light Fantastic together in my mind, so I didn't remember that that was where this story ended. It ends with them falling over the edge, with Rincewind in freefall and Two-Flower in the spaceship, and you really don't know if they're going to make it. So really strong ending in this book, and I hope that it got you really excited to read The Light Fantastic. The next point is something that really does need to be discussed. This is a Twitter response that I got from Ken, and Ken says, "This felt like a first novel that should have had another rewrite. I did love the book, but I don't think I would read more if I didn't know that the books get better as they go along. It felt like a series of disjointed short stories that were forced together with two mains." That is a word that I actually saw come up pretty frequently in messages that I got and in comment responses or what have you. Anytime somebody would message me about the story, specifically talking about what they didn't like, they would usually use the word disjointed. It is disjointed. The Color of Magic is a disjointed story. It's kind of disconnected, and these four stories just don't really seem to mesh as well as they could have, and it gets a little bit boring to essentially read the same thing over and over again. I definitely agree that another rewrite may have helped this. Lastly, I asked people for their favorite quotes, and I'm going to go ahead and read one of those to you now. It is a moment where Terry Pratchett is at his best, because personally, I find that Terry Pratchett's writing is strongest when he is doing these weird comparisons that he likes to do, and this weird anthropomorphizing of concepts. This response comes from Jameson on Twitter, and Jameson says, "Rincewind tried to force the memory out of his mind, but it was rather enjoying itself there, terrorizing the other occupants and kicking over the furniture." And this is a fantastic line. I think that it is an excellent choice for favorite quote from the book, not only because it's amusing, but because I think that we can all kind of relate to that. There are plenty of memories that end up lodging themselves in our brains that we just can't get rid of, and they also just make a bit of a mess up there in our heads. Really good quote, and I look forward to seeing what everybody's favorite quotes are from The Light Fantastic. So we are reading The Light Fantastic next. Let me go ahead and retrieve that off the shelf. The Light Fantastic is the second book, and it picks up right where we left off in The Color of Magic. You're going to figure out how in the world Rincewind and Two-Flower get out of their situation, and you're going to learn a lot more about this world and its characters. I feel like this is a lot closer to the kind of fantasy story that I enjoy. Light Fantastic is a really fun read. It is also just as quick, if not quicker, than The Color of Magic, and the pacing is substantially better than The Color of Magic. Not perfect, but it is better, at least from what I remember. So Light Fantastic is our next read. Here are the dates that you need to keep in mind for the read-along. The discussion post for The Light Fantastic is going to be going up on my Instagram and Twitter accounts on November 9th. So if you want to participate in the discussions and potentially have your thoughts added to the video, you need to make sure that you have finished reading the book by November 9th, and then check my Twitter and Instagram accounts. Links for them will be down in the description below. Speaking of that description, there are also going to be links to buy The Light Fantastic down there. If you don't already have The Light Fantastic and you would like to buy a copy of it, buying it through those links gives me a few cents, and I'd greatly appreciate that, because running this has turned out to be more work than I originally expected. These are probably going to be my most in-depth videos besides the essays. So thank you for participating and for buying the book down there. Next, the discussion video will be going up the week after the discussion post as per usual. So on November 16th, you will see the discussion post for The Light Fantastic, as well as the announcement for the book that we're reading next and the dates pertaining to that. Grab your copy of The Light Fantastic and start reading. Thank you very much for taking the time to check out this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to watch another video from me, you can do so by clicking up here. And until next time, bye.